Hey there, fellow comic fans. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm really excited because I'm joined by artist Lisa Nguyen. And Lisa has been collaborating with me on a number of different projects that we're going to be talking about today, including the Trixie variant cover for the new issue of Crimebusters #6. And then also, she did one of the stories in Geek Love #1, the romance comic that I'll be putting out later this spring. And she also did the art for Quest #4, which will be coming this summer. So we've done a lot of stuff together. We got a lot of stuff coming up. So I really wanted to talk to Lisa about her comics journey. Lisa, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Um, so again, we were talking a little bit before, the recording started, but I really appreciate your work, and I appreciate, your professionalism. So I'm really curious to just ask, like, what's your comics journey? Like, how did you get into making comics?
Okay, well, I have two older brothers, and I pretty much started out reading their comics, like Batman and West Coast Avengers were some of my first comics that I ever delved into. But I never really took an interest in making comics until I read The Crow by J.O. Barr. And that kind of really got me into thinking beyond the big two and more into indie. And then around that time was when Image Comics came out. So it was really interesting to see how other people interpreted like heroism. So after that, like I'd always liked drawing, and it really got me into thinking more about like sequential pages and interiors. And so I started from there. And this is like way beyond ahead. I didn't get my first computer until like I was in way into my late teens. So I would just draw like comics on this like any piece of paper that I had. And then as I grew older, I went to college for graphic design, but my heart was like always with comics. So always on the side, I was always working on a comic project. And I went from kind of traditional format into vertical format comics, but even though like I was able to tell a different story in that format, my heart kind of always stayed with the traditional format. So a couple of years ago, I started my own projects, zombie comics, which is like a really like one of my favorite kind of genres. But after that, I decided to try to branch out and tell, work with art writers to tell their stories. And yeah, and that's kind of what's led me to where I am now and getting to really um, like see how like their creative process works and see how people write scripts because everyone writes scripts differently. And so it's been really interesting to really diversify like how I panel and work with different stories. And it's been really great so far.
Yeah, I have some follow-up questions because I find that really interesting. Like, I actually haven't really looked at too many other scripts from other writers, but I'm aware from what I have seen that there's a lot of different like formats. I've done some a little bit of screenwriting work in the past. Um, so I tend to sort of just use the way that I formatted some of my like screenplays and stuff. But it's interesting that like in screenwriting, there's kind of a format that everybody sort of uses. It's not exactly the same, but it's very close. Whereas with comics, there doesn't seem to be that sort of um, universally, accepted sort of way to do the scripts. So I imagine working with different writers, you probably get all sorts of like totally different experiences. Um, how has that been?
Right. So, like me personally, I already know how my story's going, so I'll just write like an outline and then I'll kind of like fill in details as I go. But working with others, like I could definitely tell be like the way like someone's background might be depending on screenwriting because this um when you're planning for more like a movie kind of thing or like a live action, you can just fit in more background characters, or it's like a lot more group condensed because there's like people standing around and there's multiple actions. And but in comics, it's mostly like one action per panel. So I could definitely tell like where someone's story will be. Not that that's bad, it's just like the how different people write. But I've also worked with writers that will just write me a paragraph and just kind of have to fill out the details from there because my primarily I do the comic art, right? Um, and they'll have someone else do the colors and the lettering. So they'll just say like, hey, this is just kind of what I want, and we'll figure out the thumbnails and everything from there. And it really depends. A lot will go into detail of how they want a panel formatted. They have something in mind already, but others are just more like, hey, I'll let you figure it out. And that's really fun because you get to really experiment with creating.
Yeah, I mean, so when I started working in, on my own comics, I started reading comics 40 years ago now in 84, but I didn't start making my own, actually publishing stuff until 5 years ago. And I drew the first 4 issues myself of Crimebusters, and I didn't write anything down. So I was just like, I didn't even really do an outline. I guess I kind of did, but it was very vague. It was just like one sentence about each like 2-page spread. And then the outline for me was actually doing the thumbnails. So it's been interesting to try and learn how to write that out for other people. I always try and keep in mind like what you said about there just being the one action. One thing that I had picked up from one of my favorite writers, Kurt Busiek, is the idea of doing like a big spread that to show the whole area, so people get set in their mind. Here are all the characters in the scene. Like there's a thing that we did in the issue of Quest that you drew, where they go into the tavern, and we did a full page spread where you can see the whole tavern, where all the characters are. And then when we go in to the individual panels, people have in their head, they know what the whole scene is. And so then we don't have to try and fit in, 400 characters. Although I still had characters in the background there as well. But I always try and remember, don't put, 18 different things happening. When I read a lot of comics, it's just part of the genre, but it's sometimes funny when you read like an issue of Spider-Man or something, someone's falling off a building and somehow they have time to do like several panels of like long dialogue as they're like falling. So those sort of things I try and like keep in mind when I'm writing the script.
Right. And it's really interesting compared to like traditional format. When you go into mobile, the readership is so much different. And what I found with a lot of readers is that they don't really pay attention to like the background as much. They just kind of just go to, like just scroll down to just the dialogue or just like their favorite characters speaking. So it's really it's really interesting like how different people read depending on the format.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I'm always someone as a writer, I've always paid more attention even reading comics to the dialogue.
Yeah.
I'll look at the panel to see what's happening, but I'm focused on the dialogue. Whereas my wife reads a lot of graphic novels, and she reads them a lot slower than I do because she's looking at the artwork. She's always like, what's in the background? What are the characters? What's everyone doing? And so I feel like sometimes she's like, oh, you read so much faster than I do. I'm like, yeah, but I'm missing a bunch of stuff. You're getting a whole different experience than I am. I was just listening to a podcast about someone that was taking their printed comic and converting it to webtoons for the mobile scrolling. And he was talking about that difference where there's a lot of like talking heads and, a lot of people just scrolling to read the dialogue. Um, I've been thinking about doing something like that, putting like Crimebusters on the mobile. So I find that sort of different experience. It's always interesting and useful to look at how other people read comics, so you can sort of reevaluate how you're making the comics. So
Right.
it's interesting that you have that background, because that's something I'm just sort of learning about now. So you mentioned some of the comics that you've done for yourself, the zombie comics. I'm curious about those. Are those do you have are those things that are available mostly on the mobile or digital platforms? Do you have printed copies? I'm just curious about what you've done in the past.
So I let's see, I think it was 20 2019 or around 2018, 2019 is when I first published just mostly online because I like to kind of test the audience first, and I posted on this site that is no longer available, but I what I really like about posting digitally on sites just online is that you can kind of build, it's easier for me, I live in a small town, to build more of a community and who enjoy that genre. So I posted it online, and I never had the opportunity to print it, but it was kind of like just based on just like a story that I wrote. And now what I was kind of doing like as a personal side project is working on it this year to um, when I start, like I just jump into it, but then as I kind of reboot it, I can see how I've changed, my art's progressed, the way I think about panels has changed, especially as like I read more comics because like I pretty much think like if you want to improve your art or your writing, you have to like keep reading, keep watching movies, keep like just consuming content. So yeah, but yeah, I really like I've always once I watched like Romero's Night of the Living Dead, I was like in from there. So um yeah, that's just like one of my favorites. But I'm also working on a dark fantasy because one of my biggest inspirations was The Witcher. So yeah, just I really like experiencing um and trying out new genres because it also helps me when I work with different writers and their genres too. So
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like Crimebusters has some. It's more spooky than horror, but when I tell people that I actually horror, I can't do horror. I can't do any horror movies. I can't read any horror stuff. It's just it it's too scary for me. So like I can't watch any zombie movies or anything like that. Sometimes like when readers are like what are your influences, and I'm like, well, I don't actually read any horror stuff. So um it's interesting that they have that background. Witcher's interesting. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but like I first encountered the Witcher from the video games, from the Witcher 3. And I read the first book. It didn't really work for me. And I watched the TV show. That didn't really work for me either, but I loved the game. And that's something where like that style of fantasy that's sort of a more grounded sort of you know as opposed to like classic Lord of the Rings where it's like good and evil. um it feels like there's a whole movement that sort of Witcher is at the forefront, that's not far off from some of the stuff that I'm doing in Quest as well. um so stepping back, I guess, a little bit. So the first thing that we have coming out is the Crimebusters #6. We did the Trixie's Mysteries cover for me there, which I appreciate, and that'll be live when this is being aired on my YouTube channel there. So I'm curious if things like Scooby Doo and that sort of thing, if you were a fan of those sort of things growing up.
yeah, so I definitely grew up on Scooby-Doo. I would watch it every morning before I went to school. I had my hour of Scooby-Doo before I jumped on the bus. And so I definitely, when you said Scooby-Doo, like I definitely already recognized the feel of it. I still kind of follow it today. It's really changed a lot. So, but I still like have that core memory of how it was like back in the day. And even like I played the game like on Genesis when that came out. So there's definitely a unique um it's really unique, like Scooby-Doo, compared to like other shows where they solve crimes and stuff. it's their friendship, how they all have their role. And so yeah, I definitely got the vibe of Scooby-Doo and some of the more painterly backgrounds that they did at the animation back in the day. So yeah, to that and that definitely gave me inspiration to work on that variant cover.
Yeah, with like I used to watch Scooby Doo when I was a kid growing up, and it always frustrated me because it was I loved detective stories, like the three investigators and like Nancy Drew and that sort of thing. And the stories in Scooby Doo and the classic cartoon were never quite what I wanted because I wanted them to be a little more serious, but also every time it was like someone in a mask and whatever. Now I know that these days Scooby-Doo is very different and they do have stories where it's like, there's actually ghosts and stuff. But Crimebusters for me is kind of like this is what I wanted Scooby-Doo to be. So I'm gonna write this to sort of satisfy the kid that I used to be that wanted something like I loved the genre, but I'd watch Scooby Doo, and every time I'd come away going, that wasn't quite what I wanted. I wanted that to be a little bit different. So, um, I always find that I say this a lot, but if you make stuff for yourself, like if you do the stuff that you want to see, write the stories or draw the stories that you want to read, other people will respond to that. And so that's what I'm trying to do with Crimebusters is just write these stories that I always wanted to have for myself. Um, we also, speaking a little bit of a spinoff from Crimebusters, but the story that you drew for me for Geek Love features one of the characters from Crimebusters, Stu. And Stu is a character who has only been in Crimebusters a little bit because he's one of the supporting characters. And I had this story that I wanted to tell with him um, about that's sort of both about him becoming a wizard, but also him finding romance. And in Crimebusters, there's just no space for it. Like I just didn't have anywhere to put it. So that's part of why I was like, let's do this romance comic. And I was really happy that you were able to do that and you agreed to do it. And I loved the work that you did on that. I probably shouldn't say this, but I had already actually had someone else draw that story first. And I wasn't what I wanted from the artwork. So I was like, then I saw the pages that you were delivering for Quest. And then I was like, oh, I think Lisa would be a better fit for this story than the artist that I had previously. I shouldn't have said that publicly because I don't want that
Well,
other
thank you.
artist to see it. But yeah, when I got the pages from you for the Geek Love, I was like, yes, this is what I had been looking for the story. So I was really excited that you did that, and I was really happy with how it came out.
It was really fun to work on. I really liked the some of the way that you wrote the backgrounds and thumbnailed them out for me and kind of showed me like what you had pictured so that I could really help bring that to life in the art.
Well,
And I really like the characters too. It was fun to really go out and draw that kind of that time period too, which I really enjoyed.
I'm really excited to share it with people. And yeah, it was just like, not to again bring up the other artists that I had, but it is interesting for me to experience seeing the same script drawn by two different artists and see the different interpretations. And it's not just the the execution of the line work, but as you say, there were certain things I had in my head what the design was going to be, and seeing how even with the same layout the art comes back totally different just on a technical level is interesting experience for me to see the two different people. But I was really happy with the pages that you turn in that, and I'm really excited. I'm a huge fan of romance comics. I have hundreds and hundreds of romance comics from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and um so I've always wanted to put out a romance comic, so I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah.
um yeah, and then we also had Quest, so the fantasy comic. So that was the first project that you drew for me, but it's actually going to be the last of the three that's going to come out this year just because of the way the schedule's coming out, because I have to put out quest 3 before we can get to quest 4. So quest
Right.
3 we'll be doing at the beginning of March. So quest 4, which you did the art for, will probably be end of June maybe, or into July before we're able to get to that. But you mentioned The Witcher. Have you done are you a big fan of fantasy in general?
Yeah, I really I really like knights and like princesses and dragons and stuff like that. But what I was really drawn to was by The Witcher was that it was not just a typical fantasy, but also not a typical hero story. So, but I also really like designing armor and drawing mystical creatures. So, Quest really gave me the opportunity to really jump in there and draw a lot of different characters. And it was actually my first time drawing a dwarf, which was really fun too. So I had really fun, like before I drew the interior pages. What I always do before I start drawing any interiors is I'll draw my interpretation of the characters from the references that you sent me. So I really enjoy kind of drawing the characters in my style.
Well, I was really happy that you were able to do that for me, and I hope people enjoy it. And with quests is just been sort of an interesting journey for me as a writer because you always want continuity in the artwork, but I've actually had several different artists work on quests just because of availability. And so, I had Marcos Lima did the first issue, and then Rock Alves did issue 2 and 3, and you're doing issue 4. So again, I'm having the experience of seeing my characters being interpreted by several different artists, and it's interesting in different aspects of the design, not even the personality, but just like the character design. Some artists are emphasizing like some features or some clothing elements, stuff like that. Like Rock, when he draws the elf maniac, he takes his coat and he gives him this, has the collar popped up, so he's got this big dramatic like vampire cloak. um and when you're reading them all in order, it's there's a little differences in these things, but it's, for me, it's exciting to see that. And I really liked your interpretation of the characters and how you drew them. So that was a lot of fun for me. Again, I'm writing a story I want to read. So the fun thing for me is I get to read the story before anybody else because I have the pages. Not to taunt the readers of Quest out there, but I've already read the next issue. So that was a lot of fun for me.
It was also enjoyable to me to get to see other artists how they drew the characters too, and I definitely like seeing them like what the artist emphasized, like what in the action and just their facial expressions and their armor, like Bess's armor. I really liked seeing her in action from your drawing up how your other artist drew, so that was fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for me. And
Yeah.
in the issue 4, we have a new set of armor for Vest, so a new design that you got to draw. So I'm excited for everybody to see that. So again, we got these 3 coming out. I'll have the links to all of them down below for people watching. But I was wondering, where can people find your work? Do you have any
Okay,
like Instagrams or anything?
my portfolio is lisaofthelight.com, and although my name's Lisa Nguyen, I use my online alias is Annie at the Light. So all of my socials match that. And that's one of my a Witcher original character that I made up. So I just kind of use her as like the face of like all my stuff. So
Okay, great. Um, well, I'm really looking forward to this and to have everyone see your work. And I really appreciate you joining me.
all right. Well, thank you so much.